Chapter 1. The Last Breath of Mama Okadog. Mama Okadog gasped, clutching the edge of her thin mat as the last of her strength slipped away. It was like watching a candle flicker in the wind, struggling to stay lit. Her frail chest heaved violently, rattling like dry leaves in a storm, each breath a battle she was losing. The rusted zinc roof above groaned, almost as if it was mourning her struggle, echoing the weight of her life's burdens. Outside, Ugboha village was eerily quiet, too quiet, as though even the wind held its breath in anticipation. "Help, someone," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the silence of the room. No footsteps approached, no neighbor's call broke through the stillness. Not even a child's laughter filled the air. Just the distant bark of a dog and the faint hum of the market far away, a stark reminder of life continuing on without her. Her eyes, once sharp and steady, flickered weakly, darting to the small wooden stool by the door, the very stool where she always sat to watch the road, waiting for her children to return home. The road where their excited voices should have filled the air, where they should have run to greet her with open arms and laughter. But today, they were not coming. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into eternity. Mama Okadog's hands trembled as she reached for her rosary, a familiar comfort in her final moments. The beads slipped through her fingers like sand, each one a memory, a prayer, a hope that had long since faded. Her mind wandered back to the past, the sweat, the pain, the endless struggle of raising 5 children who now lived in distant cities, in mansions and offices, lives so far removed from the red dirt of Ugboha. She remembered their faces as babies, their laughter echoing in her heart, their cries filling her with purpose. The nights she stayed awake counting coins she didn't have, praying for a miracle just so they could eat. The days she begged for food, her heart aching as she watched her children go hungry. Promises made in the glow of their youth. Promises that faded like the sunlight on the cracked walls of her house, each one a bittersweet reminder of what could have been. Her chest rattled again, breath failing her. The room seemed to shrink, the shadows growing longer, creeping closer as if they were waiting for her to give in. She wanted to call their names one last time, to tell them she loved them despite the hunger and loneliness that had become her constant companions. But the words caught in her throat, trapped in a web of regret and unspoken love. Somewhere outside, the village began to stir. A child kicked a ball down the road, laughter breaking the stillness. A goat bleated in the distance, a reminder that life continued, uncaring and unyielding. And Mama Okadog lay alone, her strength leaving her body quietly, invisibly, while the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying away her spirit. Then, a shadow fell across her doorway. Aya Esse, her neighbor, had arrived late, carrying a bowl of watery gari, her usual offering of kindness. She froze at the sight of Mama Okadog lying still on her mat, the weight of the moment crashing down around her. Mama Okadog," Aya Esse cried, dropping the bowl, the gari spilling onto the ground like her hopes for a miracle. It was too late. The woman who had sacrificed everything, who had endured hunger and sickness alone, had finally taken her last breath. And for the first time in years, Ugboha was silent, as if the village itself was mourning the loss of a woman who had given so much and asked for so little in return. The first rays of the morning sun barely kissed the cracked mud walls of Mama Okadog's house, but the air inside was already thick with the weight of her absence. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something that would never come. Her mat lay empty, a stark reminder of the woman who had filled that space with laughter, love, and a whole lot of strength. Her body was gone, resting in the mortuary, yet the silence was louder than any voice could ever be. Ugboha hadn't fully grasped the reality that one of its own was gone. The woman who had baked gari under the relentless sun patched holes in tin roofs with her own hands and whispered prayers through nights of hunger. She was a pillar of the community, and now, that pillar had crumbled. It was hard to believe that the woman who had always been there, with her warm smile and generous heart, was no longer a part of their lives. Aya Esse, a close friend of Mama Okadog, broke the stillness. Kneeling beside the empty mat, she gently shook Mama Okadog's shoulder, almost as if she could summon her back from the depths of despair. Her eyes darted toward the doorway, half expecting some miracle to walk through. But all that greeted her was the sigh of the wind whispering through the broken zinc roof, a cruel reminder of the reality they faced. Words spread slowly, like ripples in a pond. By mid-morning, neighbors began to gather outside the mud house, drawn by an unspoken bond of grief. Whispered prayers and soft cries rose like smoke, curling into the air as they mourned a woman who had touched so many lives. Some were villagers who had shared meals with her. Others were children who had learned about Mama Okadog only recently, through stories of her strength and sacrifices. Yet all understood that no amount of lament could bring back what had been lost. The village elders convened under the old mango tree at the center of Ugboha, their faces lined with years of experience and wisdom. They discussed funeral arrangements in hushed tones, acutely aware that Mama Okadog's 5 grown children would need to be notified. It was a somber task, one that weighed heavily on their hearts. But those children were no longer residents of the village. They had scattered across Nigeria and beyond, each chasing their own dreams. One was in Abuja, rising through the political ranks as a senator. Another was in Lagos, a successful businessman. A daughter was studying and working in London. A pastor had settled in Port Harcourt, and the last had connections in federal offices. They were all busy people, too wrapped up in their own lives to notice the slow decline of the woman who had given them everything. Messages were sent. Calls were made. Emails followed. Yet, the urgency of the village's voice seemed to fade into the ether, unanswered. When the first son in Abuja finally picked up, he sounded startled, almost irritated. "Mama who? What? She's gone?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Yes, your mother has passed," said the young messenger, his voice trembling under the weight of the news. There was a heavy silence on the other end, a pause that felt like an eternity. Then came the words that cut deep. I didn't know she was so sick." It was as if the realization hit him like a cold wave. "I didn't know she needed help," he added, almost to himself, the guilt seeping into his voice. By evening, the son in Lagos received the news via phone notification while he was in a meeting. The news barely registered amidst the hustle and bustle of his busy life. "Send her money," he muttered to an assistant, assuming that financial support was sufficient, as if a digital transaction could replace a lifetime of presence and love. The daughter in London read the email during a break at work. Her reaction was immediate but detached. She booked a flight for the earliest available date, but it felt more like a task to check off than a heartfelt response to the loss of her mother. The pastor's son in Port Harcourt sat in his office, staring at the message with a heavy heart. He muttered scripture aloud, as if that could absolve his delay, as if God could forgive him for not being there when it mattered most. All 5 would come, eventually, but not in time to see Mama Okadog alive. Meanwhile, the villagers had prepared a modest coffin. It was small, handcrafted from local wood, polished as best as they could manage with what little they had. The women of the village cleaned and washed her body carefully, dressing her in the same wrapper she had worn for weeks, the fabric a testament to her life. They combed her hair with gentle patience, praying for her spirit as they worked, pouring their love into every stroke. Aya S.A. stayed close, murmuring prayers under her breath. She couldn't shake the thought of the years Mama Okadog had suffered quietly, the nights she cried alone, the mornings she waited in vain for the sound of her children's voices. They left her alone for so long, Aya S.A. whispered, her heart heavy with sorrow. And now they will grieve in gold while she sleeps in the dust. The elders nodded silently, their faces etched with understanding. They knew this was the reality they had come to expect. Money could be spent on spectacle, but it could never restore what had been neglected. Days passed, and trucks and SUVs began arriving in Ugboha. The first convoy brought the son from Abuja, stepping out in polished shoes and a crisp suit, carrying the weight of both sorrow and public expectation. Cameras from news outlets had already arrived, ready to capture the arrival of wealth and influence, completely unaware that the real story lay in absence, in what had not been given while Mama Okadog was alive. Next came the daughter from London, arriving with a suitcase and an entourage that seemed more like a parade than a family reunion. Her face was serious, her hands folded tightly, as if trying to contain the guilt she could not yet articulate. By the third day, all 5 children were in Ugboha. The small village had been transformed. Streets that had only carried the dust of the afternoon sun now bore the polished tread of vehicles and well-dressed feet. Locals watched silently, their curiosity tempered by years of witnessing similar but empty displays. The elders met again, this time to prepare for the ceremonial funeral. There were arguments about tents, caterers, and the number of cows to slaughter. The modest wooden coffin was suddenly rejected. She deserves a proper casket, one son declared. Polished, sturdy, worthy of her name. Polished, sturdy, worthy. Words that carried gold and pride, but none that could touch the years of neglect, the nights of hunger, or the silence of abandonment. Aya S.A. watched quietly as tents were ordered from the city, a live band booked, and banners printed with phrases like "a beloved mother" and "gone but never forgotten." She shook her head, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. They will celebrate her death like she was a queen, she whispered to herself. But they did not live her life. The children argued over speeches, over seating arrangements, over who would deliver the eulogy. As if the louder they spoke, the more their sorrow would be validated. None asked about the small, weathered room she had lived in, the leaking roof, or the nights she lay awake hoping for their presence. Mama Okadog remained in the mortuary, quiet, still, unnoticed, while the machinery of wealth and influence began to transform her death into a spectacle. The tension in Ugboha was palpable. Villagers watched from a distance, unsure whether to mourn, to intervene, or simply to witness. Some whispered about the injustice of her life, how the children had flown far away, leaving her behind. Others shook their heads, knowing that the story of Mama Okadog's struggle was a lesson the children would only understand too late. At night, the village returned to quiet. The tents remained folded. The roads were dusty once more. But in the mortuary, Mama Okadog lay waiting for her children to remember her in ways that money could try to fix, but never truly would. And that night, as the moon rose over Ugboha, Aya S.A. whispered softly, alone in the room, "They will celebrate you, but they cannot bring back your life." And the wind carried the words into the darkness, where only the earth would listen. Mama Okadog's body left Ugboha at dawn, making its way to a mortuary in the city that was far more upscale than anything she'd ever known. It was placed in a hired ambulance, white, clean, and air-conditioned. Can you imagine? This was the kind of vehicle she had never entered while alive. As the doors closed behind her, the sound echoed through the village like a final insult, a loud reminder of the life she'd lived and the life she'd left behind. People stood and watched, some with tears in their eyes, others crossing themselves in silent prayer. Some shook their heads, and a few whispered prayers that had come far too late. You could feel the heaviness in the air, a collective sorrow mixed with disbelief. The ambulance drove away, kicking up dust along the narrow road, carrying Mama Okadog to a city mortuary she would never have imagined seeing in her lifetime. Behind it, a convoy of cars followed, their engines humming softly, almost as if they were tiptoeing past the grave. Back in Ugboha, the village resumed its normal rhythm, but something felt different. The edge of the village seemed emptier, a little less vibrant without her presence. In the city, Mama Okadog was tagged with a number. Her name was written in black ink on a form, her age guessed at, her belongings, a couple of wrappers, a rosary. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? The mortuary attendant glanced at her thin body and sighed. "These children waited too long," he muttered, a mix of pity and frustration in his voice. But hey, business is business. She was placed in a refrigerated drawer, the sound of metal meeting metal echoing like a final goodbye. Meanwhile, back in Ugboha, planning meetings kicked off almost immediately. Mama Okadog's children gathered in the village head's compound, chairs arranged neatly, bottled water handed out like it was some kind of party. Phones rang constantly, and the atmosphere buzzed with urgency. "This burial must be big," the eldest declared, his voice firm. "People must know who our mother was." You could feel the pride in his words, but it was tinged with something else. Was it guilt? Another sibling nodded vigorously. "We cannot do small thing." But nobody dared to mention how small her life had become, how her existence was often overlooked until now. A budget was drawn up, and numbers flew around like confetti, amounts that could have fed Mama Okadog for years. Catering alone cost more than her house. Can you believe that? Live band or DJ? Someone asked, their eyes sparkling with excitement. 10 cows or 50? The conversation spiraled, with discussions about canopies from Benin City or Achi, and whether they needed souvenirs for guests. They argued passionately, each voice rising above the other. But there was an undercurrent of desperation in their enthusiasm. Once, someone asked quietly, "Did Mama ever ask for anything specific?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and heavy. "She was simple," someone finally said. "She would want whatever we decide." The village women watched from a distance, shaking their heads. "They are spending plenty money," one whispered, a hint of disapproval in her tone. "Yes," another replied. Money that did not reach her hand when she was breathing. The weeks dragged on. Mama Okadog remained in cold storage while banners were printed. Her face, old, tired, and edited, appeared on large posters plastered around the village. Only Aya Sa noticed the irony. She walked to the back of Mama Okadog's house and touched the wall gently. The mud crumbled under her fingers. "So this is what it takes," she whispered, "to be seen. It's a sad truth, isn't it? That sometimes we only recognize the worth of someone when they're gone." On the morning of the burial, Ugboha woke early, buzzing with a mix of excitement and sorrow. Mama Okadog's body was brought back in a very expensive, well-polished coffin that gleamed in the sunlight. Women tied black wrappers, their faces somber yet dignified. Men wore dark clothes, their expressions serious. Visitors poured in from nearby towns and cities. Some came out of respect, while many came for the food. Let's be honest, right? The hearse arrived at noon, and the coffin was heavy, polished, and oh so expensive. 6 young men struggled to carry it, their faces flushed with effort. The priest followed, Bible in hand, his voice solemn as he prepared to guide them through the rituals. Prayers were said, solemn and heartfelt. Speeches were made, each one more grand than the last. One son took the microphone and spoke confidently. "Our mother sacrificed everything for us. She was strong. She never complained." Ugboha listened, but Aya Sa closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. Mama Okadog had complained. She had complained quietly, through hunger and silence. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, wailing erupted. Some tears were genuine, while others felt performative, almost like a show. Cameras flashed, and drones hovered above, capturing angles that grief had never asked for. It felt surreal, didn't it? Then it was over. Sand met wood, and earth covered Mama Okadog completely. Her grave was neat, well-marked, and proper, better than her life had been. By evening, music returned, and plates overflowed with rice, meat, and drinks. Laughter mixed with mourning, children ran about with full stomachs, and guests praised the children. They really tried, people said. They honored their mother well. But Ugboha remained quiet, the village holding its breath. That night, after the last guest left and the generators were turned off, the village fell silent again. Mama Okadog rested in her expensive grave, while her house stood empty, a hollow reminder of what once was. And a question lingered in the air, one nobody wanted to answer. Was this honor or guilt? It's a thought that haunts the living, isn't it? The lavish funeral had ended, the tents dismantled, the polished coffin lowered into the earth, and the drones had long flown back to the cities. Ugboha slowly exhaled, returning to its usual rhythm, the laughter of children, the hawkers' calls, the distant hammering from farm repairs. But Mama Okadog's absence lingered like an invisible shadow, heavier than any dust the village roads could hold. Mama Okadog's children, now back in their respective cities, carried with them the polished memories of the funeral, the banners, the speeches, the applause, but none carried the weight of her life. None carried the memory of her nights alone, praying over cracked walls for children who never returned. In Abuja, the eldest son sat in his office, staring out at the skyline. The city lights twinkled like a million tiny excuses. He had returned to meetings, appointments, phone calls, and social obligations, but the funeral replayed endlessly in his mind. He remembered the coffin, shining gold under the sun, and his mother's frail body that had never known such luxury while alive. He scrolled through the pictures he had taken during the ceremony. His children smiled in one shot, holding her framed photo. He noticed the irony. His mother had lived in dust and hunger, and now she was immortalized in gold and flowers. "Did I do enough?" he whispered to the empty room. No answer came, only the soft hum of the air conditioner. In London, the daughter returned to her apartment overlooking the London Bridge. She unzipped her suitcase and carefully placed her new clothes inside, the faint smell of Ugboha still clinging to her hands. She checked her phone, scrolling past the messages from friends commenting on the funeral photos she had posted online. Such a beautiful ceremony. She must have been so proud. Asterisk. Her fingers hovered over the delete button. Pride? She thought. Pride could not fill the empty kitchen she had sent money to, nor the nights she had ignored her mother's calls. She deleted the photos, one by one, until only the memory of her mother's frail face remained. The pastor's son in Port Harcourt attempted to return to his weekly sermons, but his voice faltered whenever he preached about honoring parents. Parishioners noticed. Some whispered among themselves. He could not speak with the usual authority. That night, he went home alone, opened his Bible, and stared at the pages without seeing them. Instead, he saw Mama Okadog, sitting quietly in her room, reciting prayers for him without complaint, without asking for her own comfort. God, forgive me, he whispered, realizing that his sermons could not erase the silence of her life. Back in Ugboha, the village had cleaned up the last of the tents. The polished casket had been lowered into the grave, now neatly mounded and decorated with flowers. The elders had gone back to their daily routines, but some paused, staring at the mound of earth. She deserved better, whispered Aya Sa to a neighbor. But life gave her nothing but us. The neighbor nodded. They will spend more on the next celebration than they ever gave her while she was alive. Aya Sa shook her head. Wealth after death cannot feed the living. The promise of renovations to her house, a borehole for the community, and other charitable acts lingered in the air like smoke. The children had spoken of them loudly during the funeral. But once back in their cities, their urgency faded. Emails went unanswered. Money transfers were sporadic. Progress slowed to a crawl. Aya Sa visited the house regularly. It remained empty, its walls crumbling, the roof leaking. She swept the floor herself, placed small bowls of food in the corner, and watered the few plants that Mama Okadog had tried to keep alive. Every day, she muttered the truth. They will celebrate her in gold, but they will not repair the life she lived. Months passed. Rain fell heavily on Ugboha, flooding small streets and washing away the dust from the funeral. Mama Okadog's grave remained neat, though weeds began to push through the edges. Flowers faded. The village quietly tended to it, as a mark of respect, but the memory of her life lingered stronger than the spectacle her children had made of her death. The eldest son returned one night to check on the care promised in her name. He walked silently through the village roads, now muddy from the rains. He approached the empty house, feeling a pang of guilt at the sight of the broken walls and torn roof. No renovations, no workers, no progress, only neglect. He knelt on the dirt, ran his hand across the crumbling wall, and whispered, "Mama, I'm sorry. I thought I had time." Time had run out. In Lagos, the daughter called her siblings for a rare family video call. Her voice was calm, yet firm. "We need to stop pretending. Mama needed us when she was alive. Not now, not after her death. We need to make this right, not for show, but for truth." Silence followed. The siblings fidgeted, unsure how to respond. Words of guilt and promises of restitution hovered in the air like unspoken accusations. The weight of neglect was finally settling on them. Meanwhile, Ugboha adapted. Life returned to normal. Children still ran through dusty roads. Women still carried water. Men tilled the farms. Yet in the quiet moments, the evenings when the sun dipped low, the air smelled of wet earth, and the village rested, the memory of Mama Okadog ***'''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''''' Ss lonely life, and the hollow grandeur of her funeral lingered. Aya continued her quiet vigil at the grave, leaving small offerings, muttering prayers, and keeping her memory alive in the village. "They celebrated her too late," she said softly. "But we will not forget her while we are here." That night, as the village slept, the wind carried the words through the cracks of the old walls and the open spaces of Ugboha. Wealth can honor a name, but it cannot restore a life. And somewhere, in the bustling cities, Mama Okadog's children could feel the weight of that truth beginning to press against their lives. Too late, but impossible to ignore. Guilt sneaks in quietly, right? It often shows up when life feels the most normal, slipping through the cracks of our minds and settling in those unguarded moments when we least expect it. For Mama Okadab's children, this feeling started creeping in during the first week after the funeral, long after the last camera had left Ugboha and the last tent had been taken down. It's funny how life goes on, but inside, everything feels so heavy. In Abuja, the eldest son found himself sitting alone in his office late at night, the kind of night where the city lights twinkled outside like stars in a dark sky. He couldn't shake the image of his mother's frail body from his mind, the way her hands trembled as she tried to hold on. The silence she endured while he was busy building his empire felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, almost suffocating. "I thought I was too busy," he whispered to the empty office, his voice barely breaking the silence. "I thought she would wait, but she couldn't." It hit him hard, you know? The realization that time waits for no one, and sometimes it takes away the people we love most. Leaning back in his chair, memories flooded in, haunting him like shadows in the night. He remembered the nights she had cried alone, the mornings she waited for him to call, her voice filled with hope that he'd finally have time for her. The gold casket, the cameras flashing, the applause, it all felt so hollow now. Guilt had a voice he couldn't silence, a constant reminder of what he had taken for granted. Meanwhile, in London, the daughter's guilt took on a different shape. She wandered through the bustling streets, coffee in hand, but her thoughts were miles away, back in Ugboha. It was a stark contrast, people bustling around her, life moving forward, while she felt stuck in a loop of regret. She remembered sending small amounts of money instead of making the effort to visit, thinking that was enough. But it wasn't. She recalled the nights she ignored her mother's calls, convinced that her busy life was more important than those moments of connection. At work, she plastered on a polite smile as colleagues commented on the funeral coverage she had posted online. Back in Lagos, the businessman's son felt his first sting of guilt not through emotion, but through a sudden failure. A major deal he had been negotiating collapsed like a house of cards, leaving him staring at numbers that refused to add up. His assistant, blissfully unaware of the personal turmoil swirling inside him, asked why he seemed so distracted. I'm thinking about my mother," he muttered, feeling the weight of those words. No one understood. Wealth had shielded him from most pain, but guilt? It was a different beast entirely. It couldn't be bribed, couldn't be silenced by power or influence. It followed him relentlessly, creeping into meetings, boardrooms, and even his dreams, reminding him of what he had lost. Across cities, in offices, apartments, and homes, Mama Okadog's children began noticing subtle signs of their guilt. A pang in the chest at a simple phone call, a pause in conversation when someone mentioned mothers, a tightening in the throat when discussions turned to money or luxury. It was like a shadow lurking just out of sight, always there, always reminding them of their choices. Each child slowly started to understand, painfully, that wealth cannot resurrect the past, cannot heal what was ignored, and certainly cannot replace a presence that was taken for granted. It was a hard lesson, but one that was sinking in, piece by piece. In Ugboha, whispers of Mama Okadog's story began to reach her children indirectly. Stories of her patience, her sacrifices, her quiet endurance circulated, not as gossip, but as mirrors reflecting their own lives. It was a wake-up call, really. They began to feel the first prickings of conscience, those nagging reminders of love they had neglected, the moral debt that no amount of money or grand ceremonies could erase. One evening, the eldest son returned to his empty apartment in Abuja, the silence almost deafening. He poured himself a drink, but couldn't bring himself to touch it. Instead, he found himself staring at a photograph of Mama Okadog, her smile warm and inviting, and whispered, "I cannot change the past, but maybe I can try to honor her memory properly." And for the first time in their lives, filled with wealth, power, and distance, the children began to understand that presence and care in life matter more than gold and grand gestures after death. It was a realization that could reshape their futures, a chance to reconnect with the love they had overlooked. They were learning that sometimes the simplest gestures mean the most, and that it's never too late to show the love that should have always been there. The guilt that had haunted Mama Okadog's children did not fade with the passage of days or the comfort of city life. It followed them like a shadow, quiet in the daylight, but pressing relentlessly in the stillness of night. For the eldest son in Abuja, the weight became unbearable one morning as he stared at his polished desk, the skyline beyond a blur. He realized that words, pictures, and promises were meaningless without action. He booked a flight to Ugboha immediately. He would oversee the care home himself, he decided, ensuring it was built properly. No contractors hidden behind layers of assistance. No delays. This time, he would witness every brick laid, every wall painted, every tile set. By the time he arrived, the village was quiet, the dust of the previous weeks having settled into familiar patterns. He stepped from the car and felt the red earth under his polished shoes, grounding him in a reality he had long ignored. The ruins of Mama Okadog's home stood in stark contrast to the grand images of her funeral he had left behind. Broken walls, leaking roof, and empty rooms spoke louder than any eulogy. "I will fix this," he muttered to himself. Workers were hired immediately, local villagers first, then others from nearby towns. Foundations were measured, walls were erected, and the process began under his watchful eye. For the first time, he felt purpose beyond money and influence. He felt responsibility. The daughter from London followed a different path. She wired funds to Ugboha quietly, ensuring the care home's supply of beds, medicine, and furniture would be sufficient. She sent clothes for the elders, books for the small library her brother insisted on including, and equipment for a small clinic. Unlike the spectacle of the funeral, these acts were unnoticed by cameras or social media. She found solace in anonymity, knowing that this was real, not performative. At night, she would sit in her apartment, staring at the faint lights of London, imagining the elders in Ugboha using the things she had sent. It was not enough, she knew. Nothing could undo years of absence. But it was something, and that was all she could give. The pastor's son began initiatives in Port Harcourt. He launched a program called Presence Over Presents, encouraging parishioners to visit their parents and elders before it was too late. Each week, he shared Mama Okadog's story in sermons, not as a tale of shame, but as a lesson in responsibility, love, and the fleeting nature of time. He also funded a scholarship in her name, aimed at children from small villages like Ugboha, giving them an opportunity to rise without forgetting their roots. His guilt became action, his remorse a catalyst for change. Back in Ugboha, the villagers noticed the sudden flurry of activity. The care home took shape quickly. Foundations became walls. Walls became rooms. The dusty lot where Mama Okadog had once lived transformed into a building that carried her name, a place that would shelter the elderly, the widowed, and the forgotten. They named it Mama Okadog Care Home. Aya S.A. oversaw many of the details, quietly ensuring that the building was functional, safe, and welcoming. She scolded workers who cut corners and praised those who showed care. For the first time in months, there was a sense of purpose in her steps. Despite progress, tension remained. Some villagers whispered about the children's motives. Were they doing this out of genuine love or merely to soothe their guilt? The elders, cautious and wise, chose to watch silently. They had seen wealth arrive with grand promises before. They would wait to see if action truly followed. The eldest son spent long days on site. He walked through the rooms with Aya S.A., discussing logistics, timelines, and supplies. At night, he would return to the small guest house he had rented in the village, staring at the stars, thinking of his mother. "I cannot bring her back," he whispered, "but I can build something that might help others like her." The daughter arrived once, quietly, without entourage or fanfare. She brought small gifts, clothing, books, and handmade blankets. She knelt at Mama Okadog's grave before entering the care home, whispering, "I am trying, Mama. I know it is not enough, but I hope it honors you." The villagers watched her humility and nodded silently. Actions, not ceremony, were now speaking louder than words. Meanwhile, the youngest son in Lagos, initially reluctant, began sending funds for medical supplies. He called Aya S.A. daily, asking about progress, checking if workers had sufficient food, and ensuring the elders had everything they needed. Each call was a reminder of responsibility he had long ignored. Each day, his guilt grew but also transformed into resolve. Even the pastor's son returned periodically, visiting the site, offering spiritual guidance, and sharing his mother's story with villagers. He spoke less of wealth, more of care. Slowly, the children's wealth, once a symbol of absence, became a tool for healing. Months passed. The care home neared completion. Walls were painted soft yellow, floors were tiled with care, and rooms were furnished with modest beds. A small clinic was set up, stocked with basic medicines. A library with books donated by the daughter opened quietly. The villagers and elders inspected the site. Their approval was cautious, but genuine. It was the first time they had seen promises turn into meaningful action. Even as the care home prepared to open, the children continued to wrestle with guilt. Late at night, the eldest son would kneel by the half-finished walls, whispering apologies to his mother. He understood fully now, wealth could build walls, provide food, and offer comfort, but it could never restore the love and presence that had been absent. The daughter sent letters to elders in the village, asking for suggestions on how the care home could best serve the community. The pastor's son ensured that the project aligned with ethical principles and long-term sustainability. Each child had found a way to act, to transform remorse into meaningful change. Finally, the day of the care home's soft opening arrived. It was quiet, intimate, and unpretentious. No cameras, no banners, no gold. Only villagers, elders, and the children standing together to honor Mama Okadog in a way she could have appreciated while alive. Aya S.A. cut the ribbon. The children walked through the hallways, seeing rooms ready to welcome elders, beds prepared for the sick, a clinic stocked for emergencies. Tears filled their eyes, not performative, not for social media, but genuine, raw, and humbling. The eldest son whispered, "Mama, I hope this reaches others the way you reached me." And in that moment, in the humble light of the Ugboha village, guilt had been transformed into purpose. And Mama Okadog's legacy began to live not in wealth, but in action, care, and remembrance. The morning the care home finally opened its doors felt different, you know? There was no upbeat music blaring, no hired crowd cheering, and definitely no flashy banners flapping in the wind. Instead, a soft, quiet anticipation settled over the village like the early morning mist, wrapping everything in a calm embrace. People whispered to each other, speaking in hushed tones, almost as if they were afraid to disturb something fragile yet profoundly important. It was as if the whole village held its breath, waiting for something beautiful to unfold. The building itself stood where Mama Okadog's old, broken house once leaned tiredly against time. Now, those soft yellow walls seemed to glow in the morning light, reflecting the rising sun in a way that felt warm and welcoming. At the entrance, a simple sign read, "Mama Okadog Care Home." No fancy titles, no long-winded praises, just her name, as if to say that this place was built on love and respect for the woman who had given so much. The first elder arrived before the sun even peeked over the horizon. It was Pa Okioder, bent with age, his walking stick tapping rhythmically against the ground as his granddaughter supported him. You could see the weight of years in his eyes. His wife had passed away years ago, and since then, he had been sleeping alone in a leaking room behind his son's house. Unwanted, tolerated, forgotten. When the doors finally opened, Pa Okioder stepped inside and inhaled deeply. The scent of fresh paint, soap, and warm food filled his nostrils, and he closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. "So this is how peace smells," he whispered, a smile creeping onto his face. The nurses guided him gently to a clean bed. For the first time in years, he lay down without the fear of rain dripping on his head, without the worry of being alone. It was a moment of pure bliss, and you could almost feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. By midday, more elders began to trickle in. There were widows who had outlived their usefulness in their children's homes, old men whose farms no longer yielded enough food, and women who had raised generations, only to become burdens when their strength faded. They came quietly, without drama or expectations, each one carrying their own stories, their own struggles. And slowly, the care home began to come alive. Laughter bubbled up as old friends reunited, and the sound of gentle chatter filled the air. From a distance, Aya S.A. watched everything unfold, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. She moved between rooms, correcting small mistakes, ensuring water flowed, food was warm, and the nurses spoke gently to the elders. Her heart felt heavy, but not with sorrow. It was something else. It was justice. She paused in the hallway, remembering Mama Okadog's voice echoing in her mind. If I can just rest, just a little. That rest had come too late for Mama Okadog, but not for others. The eldest son stood near the entrance, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't say much. Instead, he watched. He watched an old woman laugh when she saw clean sheets for the first time in years. He watched an elderly man cry quietly over a bowl of hot food, the kind of food that felt like a warm hug. He watched gratitude expressed not in loud praises, but in relaxed shoulders and steady breathing. This was what his mother had needed. Not gold, not speeches, not a crowd, but genuine care and compassion. The daughter walked slowly through the rooms, her heels replaced with flat slippers that made her feel more at home. She stopped beside a widow brushing her hair, the woman's hands trembling slightly with age. "Thank you, my daughter," the woman said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Those words pierced her chest like an arrow. She wanted to say I'm sorry. She wanted to say I failed my own mother. But all she could do was nod, swallowing her tears. For the first time, her wealth felt small, and her humanity felt large. That evening, the pastor's son led a short prayer, not in front of cameras or from a pulpit, but seated among the elders, just like one of them. "May this place be filled with presence," he said quietly, "not regret." No one said amen loudly, but everyone felt it deep in their bones. It was a collective acknowledgement of hope and healing. News spread beyond Ugboha like wildfire. Nearby villages began sending their elders, curious about this new place that seemed to radiate warmth and kindness. Visitors came, not to admire wealth, but to understand how something so simple had changed so much. Some parents in the cities began calling their children more often, realizing the importance of connection. Some children started visiting homes sooner than planned, wanting to spend time with their aging parents. Mama Okadog's life, once invisible, was now teaching lessons she never lived to see. Her legacy was transforming lives, and that felt incredibly powerful. That night, the eldest son walked alone to the grave, the moon casting soft light on the earth. "I did this too late," he whispered, feeling the weight of regret in his heart. "But because of you, others won't suffer the same way." He placed his hand on the soil, feeling the coolness beneath his fingers. For the first time since her death, his chest felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. Inside the care home, Pennsylvania Okioder slept deeply, a peaceful smile on his face. A widow laughed in her dreams, and a nurse hummed a quiet tune, filling the air with a sense of tranquility. And Ugboha rested, wrapped in the warmth of newfound hope and love. Every story carries a question. Tonight's is simple. If no one was watching, who would you be? Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. This is Tales of the Hinterland, where the quiet stories speak the loudest.